I'll try to shed light on some angle that I think that is both very interesting and challenging when it goes to MiCA and DORA and what I call on-chain regulation. Okay, so first of all, I think this phrase might sound odd to some of you, maybe even an oxymoron, regulatory innovation, but apparently there is such a thing, and in our case, not necessarily on purpose. What do I mean when I say regulatory innovation? So first of all, we talked about MiCA. Actually, MiCA makes sense, right? By the end of the day, MiCA is a regulatory framework that in a way paves the path to convergence of the traditional financial ecosystem and the blockchain ecosystem, and allows or even accelerate mass adoption. So it's a good thing, right? And makes sense, totally makes sense. I think all of us are actually waiting for MiCA to open this door. The second thing is DORA. DORA not necessarily relates to the crypto ecosystem. DORA deals with operational resilience for financial institutions. Well, it totally makes sense to make sure that any kind of financial institution works in the highest standard of resilience, or specifically cyber security standard, because of the fact that these institutions are very important. The data is very sensitive. Of course, the assets are priceless. And on the other hand, they're the ones that are most targeted by hackers, by bad groups, because they hold this data and these assets, this value. And their combination also makes sense in a way, right? If we look, for example, at DORA, DORA applies to CASPs and asset reference tokens, issuers, because they are, in a way, kind of like financial institutions. They provide financial service or tokens that are actually worth a lot of money. So they need to work in these kind of standards. Therefore, DORA makes sense for these institutions as well, right? But here comes the interesting twist. When we look at, for example, asset reference tokens, for example, real-world asset tokens, and some of the CASPs, these entities use smart contracts as a fundamental component of their business activity. Now, this is a crucial issue. Why? Because of the fact that once you use smart contracts as a fundamental component of your business, it makes it ICT asset as defined in DORA. When you look at the definition of DORA, DORA talks about any kind of software or hardware that is being used as part of your financial business. And if, again, smart contracts are being used for that, then they became a software that is an ICT asset. Now, why making them ICT asset or referring to them as ICT asset is so important? Because there enters the regulatory requirements that are now being applied to them, including cyber requirements. Now, this is a very interesting thing because the result, probably for the first time in the world, at least as far as I know, that cybersecurity regulatory framework is being relevant for smart contracts and any kind of on-chain activity. This is very important. We know that there are a lot of regulatory frameworks for blockchain activity, namely using this kind of AML and other KYC procedures as part of the regulatory frameworks and other requirements. But talking about cybersecurity for on-chain activity is the first time. And that means that these entities that are liable to these tokens or these service providers are now need to have new capabilities. And it's a very non-trivial challenge, and I'll try to explain why. When we look at the cyber and operational resilience requirements, these ones include measures that allow, for example, prevention of damage by built-in mechanisms for detection and response. You must have the ability to enforce security policy. You are obligated to the continuity and availability of the business, like 24/7, 99, like 5 nines. You must conduct a scheme of permissions and even privileged access management mechanisms. You must have the ability to deploy updates for security or patches once you get informed that you have an exposure. And you must detect and respond to third-party risks. All of these set of requirements that are now become relevant to smart contracts are almost non-existent until recently in the Web3 and specifically the smart contracts landscape, right? Because as I mentioned when I introduced myself, it's not mature enough. And some of the teams that are already working within the space, mainly in the DeFi side, are doing anything to maintain their non-liability position when it goes to their smart contracts. Therefore, they are actually avoiding any continuous protection capability. So this market did not evolve itself due to the fact that these teams are not willing to use that set of capabilities because, again, they don't want to be liable to what happened. So now these teams that are going, or companies that are CASPs that use smart contracts or token issuers that are regulated or going to be regulated, and we know that these frameworks of DORA and MiCA becomes mandatory these days, right? DORA is by the end of the year becomes mandatory, and you must have this set of capabilities already installed in your infrastructure and specifically in your smart contract. Now you need to make sure that you have these capabilities, but it's not something that have been done a lot of times before. And it's tricky, or at least very challenging, because it's a new digital space, right? And this new digital space is both decentralized and new. Well, if you would be required to do this kind of stuff in your infrastructure on premise or even in your cloud environment, you won't be not the first and not the second and not the third one that has done that. But when it goes to blockchain, you will be one of the first ones that are required to do so. Therefore, you need to do new stuff, and you need to kind of like write the playbook yourself. And that's why it is so challenging.
Eyal, I want to understand, like as a CISO for a bank, you were in charge of basically the vaults of the bank. I can imagine like the huge responsibility that lays on the shoulder of the head of security for a bank. What would be your approach under those circumstances of this new regulation coming into force, and what would you do to prepare for it? I guess being like ISO 27001 compliant would not be sufficient, right?
Right, exactly. Due to the fact that these requirements are dealing with smart contracts. That is the new thing, because when it goes to your, let's call it off-chain infrastructure or your ICT environment, both your on-prem and cloud environment, for that, the playbook has already been written. You can do the regular stuff like any other entity, both financial or non-financial entity, because cyber resilience is not a matter of banks or investment firms only, right? So you have both the know-how in the market and you have the solutions for that. When it goes to smart contracts or on-chain activity now being regulated, you need to, in a way, write the playbook yourself. So first of all, I would ask, and that's my next slide, but I can skip it. And I would ask, is it even possible, right? Because by the end of the day, if someone actually demand you to do something that is not possible, you can say, I cannot do that. It's out of my reach. But it is possible. It is possible even though the infrastructure is decentralized, because all of these requirements can be implemented via the application layer. And the application itself, the smart contract or the application itself, always stays under the control of the builder. It can be fully controlled, or it can be aligned with any other governance scheme. But by the end of the day, he controls the application. He can use this kind of level of layer of application to integrate within this application solutions that allow these functionalities, or you can do that. You can do that yourself. You can put the specific requirements yourself. It's possible. You can use, again, third-party solutions to do that, but it's possible. And that's the beauty. Even though the environment, the infrastructure is fully decentralized, the application layer allows you to do all of this stuff. And it's not only important because you want to be regulated and you don't want to violate this framework. It's important because then you keep yourself well secure. I believe that regulated entities with real people behind as the team or the founders of these companies do not want to suffer the same ratio of hacks that we experience in the DeFi ecosystem, right? We want to work in a responsible manner that actually makes sure that the risk is as low as we are all accept in the traditional world. So that you want to implement this kind of capabilities regardless the regulatory framework. But saying now that there is a regulatory framework, you are obligated to do so.
Yeah, I'm watching this slide and I'm thinking this is going to be a revolution. Detecting and responding to third-party risks. You can imagine how it works in the decentralized environment where everybody can connect to your smart contract. Doing security patches online, on the cloud, it's not an issue. But what do you do with an immutable smart contract, right? It's going to be such a change because there's not a deep thought, giving into the implication of this regulation to the decentralized space. So I'm looking forward to it. Eyal, we want to open the panel to question from the crowd. Is there anything else that you'd like to convey?
No. Let's open the discussion.
Okay, cool. A question by Javier about DORA regulation. Javier?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So, Steve, you made a comment in terms of the lack of actual deep thought about the implications about immutable smart contracts as that pertains to DORA. I was just wondering, that types of glaring challenge is one of the things that I think a company needs to look at very carefully, like maybe at first. So I was wondering if there are, in the view of the guests, other like glaring examples, not only in DORA but in MiCA, if related to maybe the issuer or the CASPs. Thanks.
Yeah, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I think at least one important thing to say is that most of the measures that I described that should be implemented can be implemented even if your smart contract is immutable. Of course, one of the most common architectures today is upgradable smart contract, but even if you use immutable smart contract, you can do that. So it's not a paradox. It's only a matter of architecture. I'll be more than happy to elaborate afterwards and we can connect, but it's possible to take immutable smart contract and to make sure that they are fully protected via the application layer, including the ability even to do security updates. Because security update doesn't mean that you need to actually upgrade your implementation. You can just use these mechanisms that allow transaction screening in a way and make sure that any kind of unforbidden pattern is not being allowed. Again, I'll be more than happy to elaborate afterwards and show you some architecture that can perform this kind of operation with immutable smart contracts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yep, I will connect.
Eyal, is there any other points that you'd like to make with regards to the Resilience Act and its application? I understand, by the way, Stefan, that there's, withstanding the Resilience Act, the DORA Act, is something that is tested during the MiCA application process, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, so I think there's also a process where the regulators will learn together with the applicants about how this applies basically to crypto asset service providers that are used decentralized infrastructure. So it's still a process that I think both sides needs to learn about how this basically compiles. Eyal, is there anything you would like to add?
I think just not to ignore Sonia's question about updating an immutable contract. I would say that the concept is not upgrading the immutable contract, but building the immutable contract with a way to configure your cyber policy and your cyber mechanisms. So you need to build an embedded security module that is part of the immutable code, and then this module can be configured. Because being immutable doesn't mean that you cannot configure it. So that's the concept of how you build an architecture that both allows immutable contracts, even though, again, I'm saying I wouldn't recommend definitely only going with immutable contracts. I prefer upgradable ones. But even if for certain circumstances you need to go with immutable contracts, it doesn't mean that you cannot deploy a security module and then configure it and actually update it whenever is required. So that's the concept. Again, I'll share my email in the chat box, and Sonia, you can ping me afterwards.
Okay, thank you.